Good morning, everyone. For those of you who want to use your headphones, I'm going to speak in French this morning. Donc, on est une organisation internationale bilingue.
Our organization is a bilingual one, as you're well aware, Minister, and I welcome each and every one of you here today at the OECD, dear colleagues, dear friends. I would like to welcome you very warmly on the occasion of the official launch of the report, Have and Have Not, How to Bridge the Gap in Opportunities. This flagship report provides the latest evidence and analysis on equality of opportunity across OECD countries, including the impact of circumstances beyond an individual's control on disparities in incomes, as well as the policy tools to address them. Ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to succeed in life, regardless of their background, is a fundamental promise of free and democratic nations. This means drawing fully on the human potential of our societies, fostering innovation and entrepreneurship, and ultimately unlocking stronger growth and prosperity. I don't know if we can have the slides on screen. All citizens across OECD countries recognize the importance of this issue. In our 2022 survey on risks that matter, 64% of respondents on average across 27 OECD countries stated that they believed more should be done to ensure equality of opportunity. Indeed, the analysis shown in this report states that a significant share of observed differences in economic outcomes is due to factors which are beyond an individual's control. On average, across the OECD, 28% of total disparities in market income can be attributed to circumstances and factors such as gender, place of birth, and parental socioeconomic background. Now, there are significant differences across OECD countries, since in a small number of OECD countries, this share is under 20%, Denmark, Finland, Switzerland, for instance, whereas in a third of countries, it exceeds 30%. Parental background continues to play a key role in shaping life chances of an individual. The education level and occupation of parents contribute to 65% of disparities in opportunities observed at the household level in the OECD average. Differences between men and women account for only 3% of disparities at the household level, although they become much stronger when equality of opportunity is measured in terms of individual earnings rather than household-level market income. In this case, gender is the single most important factor, accounting for 23% of differences in individual earnings. Geographic circumstances are another key factor that shape equality of opportunity, since access and quality of education systems, labor markets, and infrastructure is extremely varied depending on place. Higher income people are more likely to live in areas with better schools, better healthcare, and job opportunities. In contrast, people living in poor regions often face weaker public services and limited access to high-quality jobs. This reduces their income prospects and can trap individuals in cycles of disadvantages, beginning with weaker education performance. Results from our Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, shows that students in rural areas systematically underperform their urban peers in mathematics performance. Family background plays an essential role in explaining these differences, but there are other place-based factors such as school quality, learning environments, and infrastructure also contribute. These educational divides carry through up to the labor market. Our analysis shows that young people's prospects for a successful school-to-work transition can partly depend on where they live. In OECD countries with available data, the gap in the share of 18 to 24-year-olds who are not in employment, education, or training is 13 percentage points. 10% versus 23% between a country's best and worst performing region. Similarly, adults living in lower income regions are nearly 5 percentage points less likely to have taken part in training in the past month. There are other regional divides that can be found in terms of access to health, digital, and transport infrastructure. Public policy has thus a key role to play to support equality of opportunity and provide a level playing field where personal efforts can ultimately lead to success. This is why measures are needed at both the national and regional level to create opportunities for individuals in the place they live and to make sure that they have the capacity to seize these opportunities available to them. This is how the report identifies 3 priorities. First, enhancing human capital, including through early childhood interventions, education, vocational training, and lifelong learning. Governments should ensure that their education and skills systems prepare individuals to seize all available opportunities, as well as scale up support for lifelong learning as the labor market evolves. Towards this, the OECD provides unique data and evidence-based recommendations, including through our skills strategy, PISA, and the Programme for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, PIAC. Second, providing income support for vulnerable households and support for entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. What OECD evidence shows is that tax and transfer systems can be an effective lever to promote equality of opportunity. On average, across OECD EU countries, taxes and social transfers contribute to reducing inequality of opportunity by 25%. Furthermore, support for entrepreneurship and financial inclusion can enhance opportunities among underrepresented groups and boost overall economic dynamism. Towards this, governments can facilitate access to finance for entrepreneurs and smaller firms, including through loan guarantee programs and by supporting microfinance markets through dedicated funds. Thus, strengthening financial inclusion through saving schemes targeted at vulnerable households and programs to increase financial literacy can also help alleviate financial burdens on households. OECD data and platforms for dialogue can support countries in these efforts, including through the OECD International Network on Financial Education. And third, ultimately, expanding social infrastructure to enable individuals to realize the opportunities available to them, both in growing and lagging regions. Targeted housing policies, including social housing programs, can promote opportunities by expanding the supply of affordable housing and facilitating mobility so that workers can more easily move to places with better job opportunities. Our OECD Housing Policy Toolkit provides data, analysis, and policy recommendations for our member countries and partners to boost the supply of affordable and sustainable housing. Well-designed, place-based policies can be another driver of equality of opportunity. These policies include spatially targeted investments in public services such as education, healthcare, alongside investments in local infrastructure such as transport and digital connectivity to help individuals take advantage of their career and educational opportunities. The OECD will continue to support our members and partners in creating a more level playing field for all. Our data and analysis can help identify challenges that are specific to each national context. And our evidence-based tools and frameworks, including through the OECD Observatory on Social Mobility and Equal Opportunity, can help develop policy responses that are effective and comprehensive. Building on this report, our observatory will study the effects of intergenerational wealth transfers on opportunities, as well as the intra-household allocation of resources and the return on public investment in key areas for promoting opportunities such as early childhood intervention and social policy. We look forward to continuing to work with our members and partners to unlock better opportunities for all through better policies for better lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to hand the floor to the High Commissioner for Strategy and Planning, Clément Beaune, for the first keynote address. J'ai le plaisir et l'honneur d'accueillir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to welcome Clément Beaune, High Commissioner to Strategy and Planning. Please, Minister, you have the floor. Thank you very much, dear Secretary General Mathias Cormann. Thank you for having me here today and for speaking French this morning. Madam Director General, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to be back here at the OECD for the launch of this work, and I'd like to commend you for its quality and once again thank the Secretary General for your commitment, your constant commitment, Matthias, to these critical issues of equal opportunities. For a long time now, the OECD has provided governments and public agencies like ours much needed diagnostic benchmarking and policy tools. These are fundamental. They are objective and data driven, and I think we truly need a rational grounds for comparison of metrics and figures. After the 2018 report on social mobility, after the well-known work on taxation, on education, and on employment, you are now bringing a new perspective, a renewed metric for measuring equality of opportunities, and especially an important reminder of what this means for our societies. As you have said, Secretary General, there are three very concerning observations that are common to our societies that need to direct us towards better policies. First of all, the figures are very telling. Throughout the OECD countries, over a quarter of income inequality is due to inherited circumstances, social origin, place of birth, or gender. In other words, these gaps are primarily driven by factors beyond individuals' control and that therefore must be combated. The second finding in this report, and it is clearly present in the public debate, but you have provided grounds for this, but we now know that younger generations now face a higher level of inequality of opportunity than older generations at the same age. This is a wake-up call for social mobility, for the trust that we can have and our citizens can have in our economies and democracies. And I think that this is a fundamental topic in some of the social debates that we're currently witnessing. And last but not least, you were very clear about this. There is a territorial divide between rural and urban areas, and in some regions, poverty risks that are 6 to 10 times higher than in better endowed places. Now, we know that these gaps are also reflected in access to public services, life expectancy, and educational outcomes. And we all know that, unfortunately, within our countries and even within regions, these geographical divides can determine different destinies. These three outcomes compounding each other must be taken very seriously. We are being told that if we do not act, we will be wasting talent, we will be stifling innovation and weakening our democratic cohesion. And this must be taken even more seriously because we have major transitions underway and they could further compound these inequalities. First of all, the climate transition and the technological transition with artificial intelligence. But I'd also like to stress something that we have been working hard on, which is the demographic transition. This is weighing on most OECD countries, and we are seeing it more now in France. And this will have a different impact on urban and rural areas and better endowed or less better endowed areas, and could further compound inequality of opportunities. But you've also highlighted in this report policy levers to address these issues. And I'd like to focus on France and set forth three of these policy levers. First of all, education. Education is the cornerstone of this issue. We have had very innovative educational policies these last few years. For instance, we split by half the number of students in classrooms in first 2 years of elementary school in what we call priority education areas. This means first graders and second graders, and that's almost 300,000 children and students we've reached, and that means smaller classrooms for teachers, and we have noted the positive impact as they move into secondary education. The second policy field we are working on is access to public careers. This is important. We've been working hard on inequality and accessing public careers, and our High Commissariat has been working on this. And when you're 20 or 22 and you're moving towards public officials' openings, we have decided to pick up students who dropped out from the most prestigious selective competitions or public service schools. And we have been setting aside 15% of our openings in major public service schools for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds and who haven't gone through the higher education that most people do to get there. And that's important as a sign and a message for society. And last but not least, I'm a former Minister of Transport, and we believe that transport and spatial planning is fundamental because geographic mobility is a condition for social mobility, and the lack of geographical mobility means lesser access to education or jobs. We published a report on education, culture, sports, and the digital transition, and it focused on the cross-cutting issue of gender inequality, which still weigh very heavily. And we worked on sexist stereotypes, which are actually at the very heart of this divide, because these stereotypes are found throughout early childhood up into adulthood, and it is an objective driver of inequality in career choices and access to education, and ultimately a waste of women's talent. So our institution's role, and we do use OECD's work to do what we do, is to use this longer term perspective and to focus on policy coherence. Now, you might object that policy and electoral cycles are often at odds with a longer term perspective, and especially even more so in the current political situation in France. But that does not mean we should shy away from this. To the contrary, we need to focus on lasting policies. The issues of demographics of the climate transition has led us to focus on these three major transitions to make concrete proposals to reform our climate insurance policies, on combating sexist stereotypes, on the demographic transition, and we will continue to do so in the next few months. There have been many studies these last few years on equal opportunities or on the lack of equal opportunities. 2 years ago, we worked on legacies and educational pathways. Today, we are focusing on these educational inequalities with a report that will be launched in January, but we go beyond education as well. We are focusing on productivity and changes in the workplace, on the green transition, on demography, and that is the whole point of an initiative which I'd like to advertise with your permission for just a minute, because I believe you will find this enlightening. This is an initiative that we are launching on October 8th. It's called France 2035, France 2050, and I know this is a very French initiative, but what we will be doing is benchmarking our country with other neighboring countries and other OECD member countries. And we will look ahead 10 years from now, 2035, and then a generation ahead, 2050, and try to spell out the major changes that are ahead and figure out how the biggest public and private institutions will be impacted. Labor, public service, our productive economy, funding our social model. We will be addressing this through 10 different topics. And for 10 months, we will be bringing academia, the public and the private sector together to hear sociologists and to figure out these major transitions. This is something that my office has been doing since 1964, and it's the 10th major forecast initiative. You're all welcome to attend the launch. Of course, you personally, Mathias Cormann, Secretary General, but also all of you. And then we will be opening this up and looking forward to working with all of you in the next 3 months. And last but not least, you know my European DNA, Secretary General, you never recover really from this kind of a religion, but I am fully convinced, and this is true for France as it is for many other OECD member countries, even if they're not EU members, that we need to compare each other. But I know this is still difficult in France. It's hard to benchmark our model compared to others on pensions, on social policies, on unemployment benefits, not because we believe that elsewhere is necessarily ideal, but because we need to go look for ideas or initiatives that could be beneficial for us. And we believe that this benchmarking is paramount. And we will be setting up a very small office in Brussels, a one-person office to step up this comparison and convergence process. I'd like to conclude by thanking you once again, Secretary General, Madam Director, for this fundamental piece of work, because we know that equal opportunities is a foundation of our democracy. It should never be taken for granted. It needs to be cared for and tended throughout life cycles and societies. And that is what brings our OECD member countries together. We share this value and this model of a society. So thank you for contributing to this discussion and providing fact-based and data-driven insights to this discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister, for this very clear vision and the roadmap you've just set out. Thank you for insisting on a longer-term perspective. We believe that this is fundamental and highly consistent with the OECD recommendations in this field. So thank you once again.
We will now hear a message from the Minister of Health and Social Affairs and Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, Mr. Vandenbroucke.
Dear Secretary General, dear participants, thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words on your new report, To Have and Have Not, How to Bridge the Gap in Opportunities. Let me first of all congratulate the OECD with this new report. I'm delighted to see that you have continued and enhanced and deepened the work set out in your landmark report on the broken social elevator. With the introduction of a new methodology, your report makes an important contribution to the measurement of inequality of opportunity, which is a particularly challenging task, and you thereby carefully explain the normative, the conceptual, and the empirical problems at hand, and all the caveats. Inevitably, you touch upon an important issue in public debate. People value personal effort, and we should indeed value personal effort. But your report convincingly demonstrates that factors beyond personal effort, like your parents' socioeconomic background or the place where you live, shape to a significant extent existing and persistent inequalities. The meaning of such evidence, both for the public debate and for policy, can hardly be overstated. Indeed, we cannot afford to leave social and economic potential untapped if we want to maintain, let alone strengthen, our social protection and health systems. And we need to break a vicious circle of disadvantage and give people a perspective for social mobility. The report makes clear that we need to transcend one-dimensional policies if we want to achieve this. What is necessary is a battery of measures, a multidimensional strategy. Human capital, economic resources, social infrastructure set the right framework for policy action. These domains for action are in line with the approach I put forward in the context of last year's Belgian presidency of the Council of the EU. Well-designed, well-integrated social policies, by ensuring a more level playing field, are not merely a cost factor, but they are also an investment with social and economic returns. Social investment is all about creating opportunity. In my country, we also try to take measures to support the capacity of individuals to realize the opportunities available to them. And an important focus thereby is on children. I mentioned a few. To reinforce early childhood education and care policies, various measures are taken. For instance, the Flemish government invests in a significant improvement both in terms of the number and the quality of childcare places. It is also introducing healthy school meals to counter the empty lunchboxes. And it takes initiatives to enhance learning opportunities for school-aged kids. This action will be part of an updated national action plan on the European Child Guarantee that we wish to launch in April next year, all about opportunity. But also for adults, the question of how to create new opportunities, how to break vicious circles of exclusion, is never closed. We are developing a battery of initiatives to support persons in long-term incapacity to return to the work floor. Here too, the challenge is to empower people so that they can grasp new opportunities and be included in our society again. Results obviously show that creating more equal opportunities remains a challenge, also in Belgium. And therefore, your report comes very timely. Both the analytical results and the policy proposals are very valuable, and I count on the OECD to continue this line of work and to support countries further in their fight against inequality of opportunity and the promotion of social mobility. This report should be a true source of inspiration for my colleagues across the whole OECD, as it is for me. Many thanks for this.
Thank you very much for this intervention. And I think the point about creating new opportunities resonates very much with the words we just heard about the many profound transformations that are ongoing. And so I think the questions of how do we actually take those transformations and think in terms of how they can open new opportunities for the new generations and the ones that are already in the labor market, I think is very, very interesting to address, and perhaps is one that we're going to discuss a little further during the panel that we're now going to start. So I'm very delighted to have a range of experts that are joining us this morning to discuss the findings of this report in more detail. With the report, we felt a very important gap in the analysis. Of course, the topic of social mobility is one that the OECD has been working for many, many years. But this is the first time that the OECD develops analysis that is focusing on one very specific measure of inequality of opportunity. And that, of course, had a number of technical challenges, and perhaps we'll hear a bit more about those challenges. This is certainly not a job that is finished. Nevertheless, with this report, we are putting forward some important evidence for policymakers. And what we would like to discuss today during the panel is the challenges for policymakers and the opportunity to address some of the issues. So we thought we would bring together a number of stakeholders, because of course social mobility and equal opportunity are topics that are wide-ranging, and it's not just for policymakers, it's for all voices in the society to do something about it. I'm going to start introducing the first panelist, Carlotta Balestra, who is the head of the OECD-wise Centers Inequality Unit. She's a specialist in social statistics with extensive experience working on inequality, poverty, and well-being. She was the project leader and one of the main authors of the report. So it's really thanks to her and her team if we are here today. So Carlotta, as the main author of this report, what are, in your view, I mean, what have been the main findings and conclusions that stand out, perhaps the most surprising findings?
Thank you, Romina, and good morning, everyone. I think I would need to take at least 2 minutes to thank all the colleagues who contributed in different capacity to this report, but I don't have the time. But I would like at least to thank warmly all the other co-authors who contributed to the report, those who are here in the room and those who are joining us online. As High Commissioner Beaune mentioned, this is a very complex and transversal topic, so we really wanted to bring in expertise from different parts of the organization. Thank you for all your contribution and efforts to this venture. I also would like to briefly acknowledge that, as Romina said, this is a new novel analysis for the OECD, but the analysis stands on the shoulders of giants. And we have some of those giants here in the room, Professor Francisco Ferreira, but also Professor Peragin and Professor Serlenga. And we also have notable scholars joining us online, whose work has really paved the way for this analysis. So thank you for this. So to get back to your question, Romina, about interesting results, a lot of them have already been cited by the Secretary General and the other distinguished speakers, but I would like to start with a personal anecdote. Over the past few months, I had the opportunity to test some of the findings with the family and friends. And when I mentioned that a bit more than a quarter of today's disparities in income are due to inequality of opportunity and inequality of opportunity and the role of circumstances beyond individual control, I often got the reaction, oh, I thought it would be even higher than that. And of course, while my small opinion poll is not representative of society at large, I think that this reaction was quite telling, and probably it made me realize that now that we start socializing the findings, we also need to put them in context and help users and policymakers interpret them correctly. So as researchers and authors of this report, we know that there are many reasons why this figure might seem lower than expected. One of the main reasons is that in the report, we control for a large number of circumstances, larger than what is done in the literature, ranging from a family background to place of birth, to sex, to the place where someone grew up. But we are not able to capture all relevant circumstances beyond individual control. And this is for conceptual reasons, but also due to data availability issues. So what you will see in the report and what we stress in the report is that these figures are likely to be lower bound estimates of the real level of inequality of opportunity in our society. Another reason why this figure might seem lower than expected, it is that it's an average. And averages are important tools, but they cannot tell the full story. In the report, we show that there is large cross-country variations in the levels of inequality of opportunity in the OECD, but we do also document that there is large variation within countries. We show, for instance, differences by region, differences between men and women, differences across cohorts. This means that this average figure is a useful starting point, but the ultimate goal of the analysis is to help policymakers identify some of the barriers to equality of opportunity, who is affected, and how to break them down within national context. Third, I also think that the fact that this number is lower than expected carries a positive message in a sense. And it is a shift from previous deterministic narratives about social mobility. The highly influential report, The Broken Social Elevator, was cited by several speakers. And one of the key messages from this report, you might remember, was that it would take on average 4 to 5 generations for a kid born into the bottom income decile to reach the average income level. This message is really powerful. It made headlines. At some point, it was everywhere, even in the subway in Paris. You could see stickers or posters with this stat, but it risks being discouraging, especially for people from a disadvantaged background, because it seems to suggest that regardless the level of effort you put in, birth is destiny. The message from this report is different. The message is that birth does not need to be destiny. And don't get me wrong on this, because it's something that is really close to my heart. We are not discounting or downplaying the role of inequality of opportunity, otherwise we won't be here today to discuss it. We are not even shifting entirely the responsibility on individuals. But the message is that there is scope for personal agency, and there is scope for collective action. So policy can and must act to provide individuals with opportunity and provide them with the support they need to access and realize those opportunities. So it's a message of hope, but it's also a call to action. Now, after this introduction, if I can select two findings that to me are quite surprising. They are findings that relates to previous work done by the OECD on perceptions of related to economic inequality and preferences for policy. So this measure is highly technical. It is based on machine learning techniques, on regression trees and forests. You will have all the detail in the report if you want to dig into. But in the report, we show that this measure is highly correlated with people perceptions of economic fairness. We show that in countries where inequality of opportunity is high, according to our measure, people are also more likely to report that family background is key to get ahead in life. And they are also more likely to think that more should be done to improve equality of opportunity. Now, the fact that we are able to make a link between objective and subjective measure of opportunity, it's a great contribution to me. And the fact that this measure, while being highly technical, speaks to people, it also means to me that can serve as a useful empirical basis for policy and public debate around opportunity and how to achieve it. And related to this funding, there is also a generational component, because in previous OECD work, we showed that younger generation are more likely to think that individual and inherited traits are key to economic success, more than previous generations did. In the report, we show that this is not just perception. In many OECD countries, we show that younger generations face nowadays higher levels of inequality opportunity than previous generations did at their age, at the same age. So I think this is why it's so important to have younger representatives here at the table and to hear their views as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So birth does not need to be destiny, and we're trying to give a message of hope and a call to action. And thanks so much, I think, for nuancing some of the findings of the report, putting them in context. I think this is very, very important. But we're now going to hear from the other panelists. And you have done it all. Carlotta, you have introduced Francisco, so I'm not going to say very much. So he's a giant sitting next to me, Amartya Sen, Professor of Inequality Studies and Director of the International Inequalities Institute at the London School of Economics. So you are a great expert of measurement causes and consequences of inequality. But not only that, you also are the former chief economist for Africa at the World Bank. So you know the policymakers and the governments really well. So my question to you, actually two questions. First of all, what do you think are the sort of greatest insight of this report, and how those add to the analysis of intergenerational mobility? But the second question is precisely, what are the lessons for policymakers? How do we take those findings from there?
Thank you very much, Amina, and thank you to Carlotta for the invitation to be here. I think my wife would say I'm only a giant in one dimension, but it's good that somebody else thinks differently. Good morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure actually to be here and to have read the summary of the report, and I look forward to reading the whole report. And I want to congratulate the OECD and Carlotta and her team for the report. and the OECD for the launch of this social observatory this observatory on social mobility and equality of opportunity, which adds to the work WISE is already been doing, and which I think is really fascinating and important. I think Carlotta is right to say that the methodology here is sort of leading edge, sort of best practice at the moment. And I should just say it's, when she says it's highly technical, it's not technical because we like playing around with technical things. It's technical because it's actually difficult to measure this thing, equality of opportunity. And it's difficult to measure it because, if you use too few circumstances, you bias the thing downwards. But also if you put everything in the model, you bias it upwards. So there's a statistical issue of finding the right way of measuring it, which is what they have done very well using these random forests and other things. And Romina, you asked about how it builds on the work that the OECD has already done on social mobility, which I would like to acknowledge. Also you mentioned the statistics on the generations and so on. I mean, that Growing Unequal report of 2008, which also drew and worked with academics, actually, in that case, true giants like Tony Atkinson and others, was a very influential report. So you stand on the shoulders of internal giants as well when you're building on it. So the question is, do we learn anything differently from this report than from the earlier work on mobility? And I think you do, because the two concepts are actually quite closely related, right? If you think about it for a moment, equality of opportunity, inequality of opportunity is about how a lot of things in your past, a lot of circumstances you inherit, predict your outcomes. To what extent can parents' education, parents' occupation, place of birth, and all these things predict your outcomes? And mobility, in a sense, is the same, but it uses only parental income as the circumstance. That's the only thing. Mobility is about parental income and child income, right? So the two are closely related. The key difference is that parental income is a very important circumstance, but it's not the only circumstance. And so what this report does is it brings all these other things: place of birth, gender, country of origin, some early childhood characteristics, like about the family composition, nature of parental relations, a number of circumstances that are actually quite novel and nicely used there. And these things matter and make the identification of the disadvantaged groups more granular. It's not just about your parental income, it's about where, it's about family types, it's about origin. In the European context, country of birth, and so migration status are all very important. And so I think you do learn quite a lot more about it in that way. There are two other ways in which I think you learn more from this, or you learn new things. One is that, these correlation coefficients or intergenerational elasticities from the mobility literature are directly mathematically related to the share of income that can be explained by parental income. So when Carlotta and her team say, we find that a lower bound of 25%. Well, when you have an IGE, an intergenerational elasticity of 0.3 or 0.4, which is what you typically have for European countries, even in some cases lower than that. That means that the share that parental income explains is the square of that. So 0.09 to 0.16, right? So 10 to 16%. Just believe me that if you square it one number, you get the share. And that's even lower, right? That's even lower. So we are picking up more influence and more importance of background by looking beyond income. So that's also important. And the other thing that's important is that because there's a little bit of you have to square things and it's not that clear, when you look at mobility, people don't often realize it's a lower bound, but it is a lower bound. And this work requires us to think of it and make it very clear that it's a lower bound, because you realize that if you observe more things, you observe how many years your parents went to school, but not where they went to school, not the grades they got, not how well they did. You don't observe their wealth. You don't observe many things. And we know that if we observe more things and had larger samples, this number would rise. And so the 25% is a lower bound, right? The other thing that it does is that I want to emphasize is that, I had the same reaction as all of your friends, right? 25%. It's not that high, but I know we know where it comes from. But if you look within the OECD, one of the minister Beaune, I think, was talking about benchmarking and comparing. Just within the OECD, you have a range that goes from 10, 12, 15% in Iceland, Denmark, and Finland, all the way to 40 to 50% in the US, Russia, Portugal, 50% in Bulgaria. So presumably, if countries care about fair chances and equal opportunities, there's a lot they can learn from the ones that have done better in this case, which I think is very interesting. So let me move to the second part of Romina's question, which was lessons for policymakers. So let me first start by saying one of the things that inequality of opportunity measurement can do is it can generate what we call opportunity profiles, because by definition, you're using these different circumstances, you're creating subgroups, right? So the summary statistics are averages, but we can have these subgroups. We can have, for example, I remember in the case of the UK, in our own work, I haven't looked at your UK numbers, but in our own work, there were very interesting interactions between country of birth and mother's education. So for instance, migrants from Canada and Bangladesh and Turkey to the UK with highly educated mothers are towards the top groups. From the same countries, but with lower educated mothers, are in the bottom groups. And it interacts with gender and interacts with occupation, interacts with all sorts of things. So you end up with a sort of map, a sort of social structure almost. It varies a little bit from tree to tree. There's some other technical things that I could bore you with at length, but I won't. But on the whole, you get real insights from that, which I think policymakers are interested in, the profile. Who are the people who are most disadvantaged regardless of their own efforts and how hard they work? I think that's important. Then let me just reflect for a moment on this tripartite classification, which the Secretary General summarized from the report of, you have a range of policies, but you basically group them under sort of human capital. Then the way it was summarized in French didn't mention the word wealth, as far as I could tell, but actually in the report, you talk about wealth accumulation for the poor and poor families, which I think is quite important. And then expanding social infrastructure, which is also hugely important. I think that's very much spot on. And, when I worked at the World Bank, I spent about 20 years trying to summarize policies for poverty reduction and inequality of opportunity improvement. And you often ended up with things that are similar, but you do go a little bit beyond here when you talk about this wealth accumulation for the poor and promoting the ability of more vulnerable households to build their asset base up. Because I think the key thing, and I think with this I'll end on this question, the key thing that inequality of opportunity makes us realize when you look at it is, yes, birth is not destiny, but birth helps shape destiny. And it's a lot easier to do very well if you come from an advantaged background than from a disadvantaged one. The weight of the families, their families transmit advantage, as you all do when you read to your kids at night and send them to good schools. And that's what we're in the business of doing as parents. You want to help your kids. Poor parents are doing the same thing, but they have less wherewithal to do it with. And so as a consequence, there's intergenerational transmission of advantage and disadvantage. And because of that, if we want to level the playing field, equal access is not enough. Equal access is not equal opportunity. Because some people are starting the race up ahead than other people. And so if we want to level the playing field, you really, in some sense, I like to say this for you to have an idea of how radical the things is. One of the ministers referred to the importance of education. Because kids come to school with their family behind them, if you really wanted to equal the playing field, you'd have to send the poorer kids to the better schools, which we know is exactly the opposite of what happens in most countries, the possible exception of the very, very equal ones here, right? So what the state has to do is to actually, to some extent, try to compensate for the disadvantage that people already bring onto all realms of social life, from education to the labor market. This is actually quite a radical agenda. And when you emphasize the need to promote wealth accumulation by the poor. I think you recognize that, and you raise a number of policies that are at the forefront. Some of them are being discussed, for example, in the French political debate at the moment, and I think that's very interesting. So I think you push the envelope here, not only on the technical analysis, but on the policy discussion. So I think the report really deserves congratulations for that.
Thank you so much, Professor. So equal access is not an equal opportunity, and thanks so much for recognizing that we try to push the sort of boundaries on the policy envelope, in particular, putting the focus on fair accumulation of wealth. Thanks so much for that. Now I'm delighted to introduce our next panelist, Hannah Abdianerin. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it okay. If not, please feel free to correct me. You're a consultant in digital transformation of the public sector, and you're a member of the Youthwise, which is the OECD Youth Advisory Board. This is a very important initiative the OECD launched a few years back to hear from the young people and see how those voices can actually inform the work that we do in the OECD, besides the data, you know, and all, of course, the empirical analysis, but really sort of try to also use the knowledge and the wisdom of the young generation to shape the policy recommendation. So you have a lot of academic expertise in public policies, social justice, and intersectionality. And so despite your young age, you bring a lot of that to the table. And so I'm going to ask you the same question as to Carlotta, which is, what is that you found actually interesting in this report? How did it speak to you? And also perhaps to your colleagues of the Youthwise initiative. I think you had an opportunity to discuss the report with all of them. Anna, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm truly honored to be here on behalf of Youthwise, so the OECD Youth Advisory Group, and I'm very thankful to be able to participate to the launch of this timely report and to share some of the conclusions and really speak to the way in which some of the conclusions in this report do not just live on paper, they really echo some of the stories that we've shared and discussed amongst Youthwise cohorts. So I would like to reflect on some of these stories and really link them to some of these conclusions, if that's okay. So to begin with, the finding that we found very interesting was the effect of parents' education and occupation on one's life outcomes. And I would like to reflect on Hamza's story. So Hamza is currently in the audience today, and he shared his story with us. And he notably talked about the way that he grew up in a monoparental family and faced social and economic marginalization. And that when we usually think of schools, we think of it as a pathway to equal opportunities. And in Hamza's case, we saw that the educational system often left him to face barriers on his own. So as opposed to other students who could rely on their mothers to assist them with their homework, or who could rely on academic tutors to help them face specific difficulties, or rely on your parents' network to find an internship, he usually found himself to struggle alone with these different barriers. And we believe that this story, amongst with the finding of the report, really speak to the way in which social and economic marginalization and background can shape one's educational journey and create delays that will have repercussions down the line on their life stories. The other finding that we wanted to talk about was gender inequalities, and especially gender inequalities in earnings. Growing up as a woman, I think that I was quite aware of the fact that when I would enter the labor market, I would most likely get paid less than my male peers for similar responsibilities and similar positions. I also was aware that I would most likely shoulder the brunt of domestic work in my household, and often at the expense of my own well-being. And I was also aware of the fact that I would most likely work for a sector in which women are overrepresented and underpaid despite the essential nature of such work. What the report calls for is, when we are designing policies to promote equal opportunities, what needs to be done is to really prioritize gender equality in order to make sure that everyone has equal access to education, employment, and the likes. And we need to do this for all women, because we also know that inequalities, disadvantages, and barriers intersect and overlap and shape diverse experiences depending on the social context, but also on identities. The other finding that I wanted to touch upon is about geography and the effect that the place of birth, but also the place where you grow up, has an effect on your access and really conditions your access to education, to employment, to essential services, and to leisure even. And some households have the means to relocate to better served areas. And that was my case. For example, I grew up in a suburb where the best school was half an hour away by car from my house. And my parents had the means and the will to move to a better served area where the school would only be a 7-minute walk away from my new home. And I think that this really shows that we need to promote opportunities wherever people live, because as exemplified and demonstrated in the report, most families do not have the means to relocate to better served areas. And what we need to make sure of is that wherever people live, opportunities can blossom and open access to equal opportunities for all. And so to conclude, I think that this report was very informative and very essential, and it really creates a fundamental introduction and foundation for further discussion about inequalities and the different ways that we can promote equal opportunities for all. Further research will be needed to tackle the multifacetedness of inequalities and address the ways that different disadvantages might overlap and intersect. And we at YouthWise believe that what's needed right now is to turn these findings into effective policies that can bring about change for people and promote equal opportunities for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think it was great to hear that some of the insights from the report really are very, very closely correlated to your lived experiences, but also the one that some of your peers from the YouthWise initiative shared. And thanks for highlighting the importance of promoting gender equality and touching upon the issues of intersectionality, but also the issue of well-being. That is not one we are talking a lot in the report directly, but of course we know that we're talking about opportunities, even if in the report we talk about economic opportunities, those are very much also interlinked to well-being opportunities. The next couple of speakers are going to join us online. So I'm delighted to introduce the 4 panelists. Michael Pandazis, who is the head of analysis at the UK Social Mobility Commission, which is an independent body that was set up by the Parliament in the UK to monitor social mobility and opportunity and provide advice to the government on how to promote opportunities. The work here focuses on the Commission's annual State of the Nation report, which is putting together all the annual statistics on social mobility and opportunity. And Michael also teaches economics at Birkbeck, University of London. Michael, I believe you are online with us.
That's correct, yeah.
Right, so I'm going to ask you the following question. Of course, in the Social Mobility Commission, precisely you have been tasked to develop recommendations for the UK government and stakeholders on how to address barriers to opportunities. So what do you think are the most promising avenues for improving, first of all, the evidence, the data collection and measurement of the various dimensions of social mobility? We heard a lot already about how they intersect, but also, so how do you think that the OECD can help there? And please also feel free to share any strong policy message that you would like to convey this morning. Michael, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman, and thanks to the OECD for convening this discussion for this wonderful report, and also thank you to fellow panelists and guests. Yes, I'm from the UK Social Mobility Commission, and you're absolutely right. The role of data as a microscope on opportunity and on social mobility is critical, at least from a UK perspective. But I do hope there will be something interesting for attendees in looking at the UK's example. Now, I mentioned microscopes, and I had to look this up for this intervention, but before microscopes, it turns out that, physicians knew disease existed, but they couldn't see the organisms that were causing it. So treatments were blunt and their guesses were often wrong. And we might have heard of perhaps Robert Hooke, or maybe in this company, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, But in reality, the invention of the microscope was an iterative process. And it turns out that glass makers and lens grinders and scientists were refining each other's work over the decades. And it wasn't just about them who made the best microscope, but also about how it was used. And then that fed back into the design. And Robert Hooke's work, for example, captured the public's imagination, not because he was the first to use a microscope, but because he made very detailed and impressive illustrations that were a great success when his work was published in London. And that is how I'd like us to think about data here. It's iterative refinement, and it's also how we use it. Okay, so how do we improve things? Well, data in government is always going to be a challenge, and we could always do better. But I think social mobility is a particularly tough challenge. Firstly, because we need to link across the generations. And secondly, and I suppose relatedly, we need data that's relating to the same individual over a long period of time. And this gives us three systemic challenges that we've identified in the UK, but I'm sure they are common to other countries. That's data collection, linking, and sharing. And first one, data collection is, I suppose, obvious. You can't do anything with the data that hasn't been collected. So, for example, in the UK, we don't collect administrative data on occupational class, so we're relying on surveys. We do have birth cohort studies, but those are sporadic. And of course, they're samples, so they don't cover the whole population. My second point was linking, and linking is really the key for social mobility because you are linking people's birth circumstances to their position later in life. So in the UK, for example, income is not linked across the generations in any official source. So there's no official source for high quality studies of income mobility in the UK. There have been some steps taken towards this. There's been some great academic work on the topic, but we're not there yet. And similarly with education and with occupation, they're not linked in administrative data. And again, some steps taken, but we're not quite there. And on sharing, the third thing I mentioned, well, I won't say too much about data sharing, except that incentives here are very important. So if a Secretary General of a government department or permanent secretary, as we would say in the UK, if that person shares data and everything goes right, they wouldn't necessarily get much credit. But if they share data and there's a data breach, that person might be fired. So the incentives are very important, need to be set up correctly. Okay, so those are some remarks on getting better data, but then how to use data is also really important. And here I think the distinction between mere description on the one hand and the type of causal analysis that would really inform policy changes is the key. And particularly with social mobility, we've got to think about who do we target, where do we target, and in a strange sort of way, when. Because social mobility data and analysis is necessarily backwards looking. If you have someone who's 50 years old today, so someone who's reached occupational maturity, we have to think about the effect of education policy on that person 40 years ago. So we've got a sort of backwards looking measure, and we need to think about how to make that relevant today. So some examples, thinking again back to Robert Hooke's illustrations of his microscopy and how those illustrations inspired people. Well, at the UK Social Mobility Commission, we're trying to make everything as user-friendly to the public as we can. And we've created an interactive data explorer tool, which I would encourage you to have a look at. There you can browse statistics, the general public can browse statistics, including by region. I also think it's really important, as I said before, to go beyond description, and we need better data to do that. So, for example, what is more important? Is it parental social class, or parental income, or parental education, or perhaps any one of a number of other things? And it's great to see the progress that OECD's made in this report. Where does region fit into all of this? Now, can we even separate out the effect of a region from the effects associated with the people who live there? So in other words, if you could somehow exchange the populations from, let's say, London to perhaps the northeast of England, what effect would you see? Would those people end up doing the same in their later life? And these are really critical questions, because we need to know not only why things are happening, but how we might be able to change it. And again, I think this report that OECD has launched really makes huge progress, because it can decompose the predictive contribution of each of these circumstances. And I look forward to getting more familiar with the report. And in terms of how OECD can help, and perhaps how we can help each other, perhaps this is something that's already in train, but it would be great to see a survey of data quality across the OECD, what's missing in each country, so that we can learn from each other about these key 3 points of collection, linking, and sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think it's very interesting. I mean, the starting point of your intervention was the fact that there are no official sources of income mobility, that are sort of systematically sort of developed, well, in the UK, but indeed, I think many other OECD countries show the exact same picture. And I think indeed is precisely, I mean, the future of this certainly, I mean, lies in the administrative data, and try to sort of link the different sources there, which is something that some of the teams in the OECD are already doing, and indeed also something that the Wise Center is contemplating doing, with a number of, I would say, technical and legal problems, as you just said. We created the OECD Wellbeing Statistics Working Party, which is going to be a body that will support some of that very technical work, but I think that we very much agree on what can be next steps. So we look forward to collaborating with you, also, of course, taking benefit from sort of your pioneering experience on those issues. The final speaker this morning is Rudy van Dam, who is the Director General for Analysis and Monitoring at Belgian Ministry for Social Security. You're a great expert in Europe, having chaired the indicator subgroup of the EU Social Protection Committee for many, many years. And of course, you have also an extensive academic experience. And I also want to actually commend and thank again Rudy for all the support he's been giving us. In fact, as we were developing the report, we had a number of technical sort of discussions. So I would say he's one of the sort of OECD country representatives that really sort of followed the work from the very early start. And Rudy is also somebody with whom we have been collaborating in the context of the work on social investment. And the Minister Vandenbroucke was referring to that in his early intervention. For us, that line of work is very important. There is a very clear connection between the findings of this report and the opportunities that countries may have when they want to tackle those inequalities, precisely by investing more in a number of important social policies. Rudy, I believe you are online. We can't see you, but I'm sure you're there. So the question for you, well, the house. Where and how can the OECD best support countries' effort to promote equal opportunity? But can you also tell us what do you see as the main priorities? Because as you know, I mean, there is so much to do. So where would you put the focus?
Thank you, Romina. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, that's great. So good morning, and thank you for this nice introduction and for having me in this important event on launching the report. And let me join the previous speakers in congratulating the OECD on this important report. The OECD's work, other speakers have said it, but it's good to repeat it. The OECD's work on inequality of opportunity is critically important because it complements policy discussions on redistributing outcomes with the perspective of ensuring that everyone has a fair shot on improving one's living conditions regardless of one's background. And this matters greatly for equity, but also for economic efficiency. The OECD's data-driven approach helps countries to identify and tackle structural barriers. So when you ask me how the OECD can support countries, this report is already a big step, I would say. Presenting, explaining and communicating the report is crucially important. And of course, this event is a very important first step, but I think OECD delegates, member states should take this report in hand and bring it to their own country and look at it and use it as a source of inspiration for the policy work in their country. But of course, further steps would be very welcome in using the report. What could these further steps possibly be? Well, let me just name a few. First, a very strong point of the report is that it links, and it has been said already, it links analysis with a policy framework. And importantly, and I quote, this framework recognizes that inequality of opportunity arises from a combination of different causes. I think this is a very important sentence. Recognizing the complexity of inequality of opportunity is an important starting point for policy intervention. In this regard, I think that next to identifying possible policies that tackle inequality of opportunity, a further step as policy guidance should be to look at how these policies interact and can strengthen each other to reach the desired outcomes. Let me try to make this a little bit more concrete. A study by Anton Hemerijk and colleagues, which was commissioned by Belgium in the context of its presidency of the Council of the EU, shows clear pattern of the complementary role of early childhood care and education policies on the relation between active labor market policies and employment. So the relation between active labor market policies and employment can depend on the presence of early childhood education and care policies. This pattern suggests that at low levels of early childhood care and education, active labor market policies might be unemployment promoting for families with children, especially among mothers, whereby active labor market enhanced employment take-up is likely to be concentrated among adults without care responsibilities. Hemerijk and colleagues also assessed how policy complementarity shape poverty risk, thereby looking at interactions between social protection, active labor market policies, early childhood care and education. I will not go further into the detailed results of this. And these results are still early results, but helping countries to identify which policies fit best their situation and taking account of their interaction and their combined effectiveness or ineffectiveness sometimes is, in my view, an important pathway for further policy guidance. So this was a first idea of how to use the report. Also, developing policies more from a life cycle approach can be a useful way forward. The report rightly stresses the importance of early childhood interventions, but looking at how policies should evolve and be linked across further stages of the life cycle could also offer useful guidance for countries. The report also identifies downsides of investing in more level playing field, the fiscal implications being one of these downsides. Fighting inequality of opportunity comes at a certain cost. At the same time, it is obvious that enhancing people's opportunities would bring economic and therefore also fiscal advantages. And Romina, you already referred to the social investment, returns on social investment idea. I think it is important to bring these returns on investing in reducing inequality of opportunity more in the picture. And I think that the OECD can play an important role in developing and supporting the development of approaches in this regard. And I thought of closing my advice with a topic in which I'm personally also quite involved at the moment, and that is on data. But Michael already went quite in detail into that topic, but still a few words on this. A point on which the report, and the report also closes with this topic on data. On this, I would like to say that it is important that the analysis could be extended to more countries and deepened on certain topics. Data, and more granular data, of course, have to come from the OECD member states. However, it is my experience, and then Michael also referred to that in many member states, there is a struggle with adequately accessing the necessary data to support more efficient and effective policies, even sometimes for internal use. So maybe the OECD, and you already referred to it also, could help in the reflection on procedures that can enhance the accessibility of data for use within countries, but also for sharing data in an international context. So I would like to close with this, and let me thank the OECD once again for this great report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, this is a big roadmap for us, but a very, very interesting one. And thanks so much for making a point about sort of the policy complementarities. In the panel, we talk a lot about how the different type of factors, let's say, that shape opportunities intersect and correlate. But of course, there is also an obvious correlation, as you just mentioned, in terms of the policies, how you have to engineer those. Speaks very, I think, much to the point that Clément Beaune was making about the importance of embedding a long time horizon in policy making. We now have a few minutes left for a second round of intervention. I'm going to ask to the panelists to be very brief in their answers, please. Michael, we're going to start with you. So we know that in your work in the Social Mobility Commission last year, you focused on how young people are doing across local areas in the UK. And of course, a very important dimension that this report highlights is precisely sort of the how opportunities varies across territories. So we are very curious to know about the strategies that you have used from a methodological point of view to identify the areas that are not doing well, but also, you know, the policy answers that perhaps you started sort of developing on how to improve the prospects for people in this place. These are very big questions, but you have 2 minutes to answer. Please, process yours, Michael.
Sure, thank you again, yeah. So yes, on regional analysis, we're using survey data, which is common in this field. Most usually we're using the UK LFS, Labour Force Survey. And of course, if we want to look at small regions, we end up with very small cell sizes, sample sizes. So to counter this, we've created composite measures. So we're using different but correlated measures to reinforce each other. And that gives us a bit more confidence that when we find something, it's a real effect. So for example, we've created a measure that we call promising prospects. And you could think of that as social mobility for younger people. In other words, how are young people getting on in their 20s once we take into account their childhood starting point? And then we break that down into 200 plus regions of the UK. So to make this, we combine various things: highest qualification achieved, occupational level achieved, and earnings. And if we look at all of those things together and we look at people's socioeconomic background from the Labour Force Survey, so we're looking at parental occupation in this case, we get a sort of relative measure that tells us how well each region is doing in comparison with other regions. But just imagine what we could do if we had full administrative data covering every individual. We could really drill down to a microgeographical level. And we could also start to look at causal analysis in the way that, for example, Raj Chetty and his colleagues have done in the United States. So yeah, again, just to say, I think this report that the OECD is launching makes huge progress in that regard because of this decomposition of the predicted contribution of each circumstance. So that is great. And I think really the first thing that we need to do in the UK is improve our data and then start looking at what might be going well or badly in every region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Rudy, I think we're going to stay on the topic of how the sort of the actions that policy can take at local level can really make a difference. So, so drawing from your own experience of a federal state like Belgium, what do you see the key challenges for place-based interventions, and how can those challenges be overcome? Rudy.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief. Yes, regional differences in living conditions and opportunities are challenges in Belgium. And even in an extensive presentation, it would be difficult to fully present all the issues. So it will be kind of sketchy, some elements. First of all, just it is important to understand the situation in Belgium. It is important that in a sketchy way, we have a southern part, which was among the first industrialized regions in Europe. But after World War II, there has been a shift in economic gravity from the south to the north part. It's also important to realize that this divide between the two regions is also a linguistic divide, with French-speaking southern part and Dutch-speaking northern part. And Belgium is a federal country with devolved competencies and split competencies between federal and regional authorities. When we look at the socioeconomic situation, we see strong regional inequalities along all the dimensions that are described in the report that we discuss and present here today. The poverty rate is almost twice as high in Wallonia, the southern part, compared to Flanders, the northern part. Also regarding child poverty. Employment rates are particularly low in Wallonia compared to Flanders. The opposite goes for the unemployment rate. And as a consequence of these situations, benefit dependency is also much higher in the southern part of Wallonia than in the northern part. All these findings are very consistent and have been there for already decades. When we look at duration, we also find large differences in persistent poverty, for instance, and long-term unemployment rates along the same lines. And what is not good, also on the PISA results show large differences between the two regions. I think the results in the report, based on an innovative use of rich administrative data for Belgium, in this case, I think this is a good example, pointing to the fact that regional income levels may play a role in social mobility after controlling for other factors, indicates the complex nature of all these inequalities. Of course, with several levels of government, federal, regional, policies have tried to tackle these issues, both with macroeconomic policies, trying to attract more investment in the region, as well as with more social and employment policies. However, so far, without really decisive changes in the situation, which of course points to the complexity of the issue at hand of these regional place-based differences in inequalities and inequalities of opportunity. If I may come back to my earlier intervention, this is certainly an area in which further knowledge on the mechanisms and the possible policy approaches would be very welcome. So I'm afraid examples of good practices, I don't have them ready here for you at the moment. I can, in the first place, point at the complexity and in the need to dig deeper in how these complex situations can be tackled by policies. So I'll end with this. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So this is going to be another very important next step. Hannah, if Youthwise could send one message to policymakers about the future you want, what would it be?
Thank you very much for this question. I think that our message is that we want to achieve equality in our lifetime, which means that we want to be able to live in a fairer and more inclusive society in our lifetime. And the way that we believe policymakers can achieve such a goal would be to support grassroots initiatives that are bringing about genuine change within their own communities already. And by supporting them, we mean that such initiatives should be enabled to sprout and be supported and nurtured so that they can grow and ensure that they can scale up and truly blossom and really bring about this genuine change at a more systemic level. We want genuine equality in our lifetime, and we believe that this means that every policies, every laws that is passed need to ensure that no one is left behind, especially in the context of the digital transition and of the green transition. There is a risk of entrenching existing inequalities. Making inclusive laws and making inclusive policies means addressing all of these different barriers and disadvantages that might impact people to make sure that we do not reproduce such inequalities in a digital and green world. We are ready to work with you and to work with other policymakers willing to implement genuine change in our communities. And we just need to have a seat at the table so that we can work together to achieve equality in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I will certainly remain committed to always provide that seat to you and your colleagues. Francisco, so what are the wishes, at your hand in terms of what the OECD should do next? And you can add to the wish list that Rudy already made, or you can, perhaps select some of the ideas that is already expressed, please.
Thanks, Romina. So 3 very quick points, and some do overlap with things that have been mentioned before. So in terms of, new analysis of inequality of opportunity, let me say first, within the space we're already in, which is with income and earnings as the dependent variable, I think there are 2 directions that are really interesting to explore. One, as I said, parental income is a circumstance. And so there's no reason why the mobility and IOP literatures have to separate them. Income can be added as a circumstance. Now, there are real data challenges, which, the team was telling me about already, and I know they exist, and Mike was referred to them as well. It is possible in some countries. Work has been done in Sweden, for example, in measuring inequality of opportunity with parental income as an added variable. And the OECD, I think, has the heft and the power to continue to push for data configurations where that is possible in other countries. So I think that's one. Second, related but not the same, is, and it's also been mentioned before, is exploring moving from surveys to administrative data sets where that's possible. One of the big contributions of this report was the place-based granularity, right? The spatial granularity. And of course, you can go much deeper if you have administrative data sets. That's on still keeping income or earnings as the dependent variable. I think the question partly asks about going beyond incomes. Here an obvious win is to combine 2 great OECD projects and use PISA data on the left-hand side, as it were. This has already been done. Some of us have worked on inequality of opportunity in education by looking at the contribution of different circumstances, family backgrounds, other variables to the distribution of schooling achievement. And it's kind of fits into the production function. We know that education is a key contributor to income and well-being, and it is also helped, shaped by these factors in different ways. So that's something, and perhaps you're already working in that direction, but I think that would be important to explore. Then the other things, I think education would be the next one I would go to, but obviously there's also work already done on health measures and health status. One could use wealth data directly, like the Luxembourg Wealth Survey. There may be other sources. One thing that's becoming closer to my heart in terms of importance, particularly perhaps since I'm living in Britain at the moment, is housing. Housing is a fundamental asset for people, and it's a fundamental determinant of access to living in certain places and cities. You know, we're talking about why people move or don't move to where the opportunity is. Well, very often it's because they can't afford housing there. So housing is an important dependent variable there. And to end, the last thing I would say is, you know, one of the strengths of this report is the place-based comparison and the regional comparison. And I noticed, at least in the summary, that is often done within countries, right? So you have these beautiful graphs, for example, with regional differences, but they're always benchmarked so that the median region is at 100 or whatever, which, and I understand very well, coming from a multilateral organization in the past, why you do that. But I think, you know, it would be really interesting to allow for the differences across countries as well, and to put, for example, all of these regions in absolute terms, and you would get gigantic disparities. We've done some work with co-authors on inequality of opportunity in Europe, treating Europe as the country and the different countries as regions. And, you know, you realize there's a lot of inequality left within Europe, and even more so within the OECD, of course. So that's something else that can be done. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much for this very interesting suggestions. I'm sure will prompt a lot of discussion in the team. Carlotta, you're going to have, you know, the final word, actually, and it's point for choice in terms of all the different ideas that have been shared. Where do you see the future of the OECD's work in this area?
This is a mission impossible, Romina, in 2 minutes. I think that there has been a clear plea to improve data availability and data sharing, and this is an area where the OECD put a lot of emphasis on. To me, it means two things. It means that it also a call for national statistical offices to include regular retrospective questions in their survey and keep consistency in the way these questions are asked, because otherwise we have problems where we want to compare levels of inequality of opportunity over time, as we faced while preparing this report. The other point is, of course, for the OECD to be more ambitious and try to explore and unlock different data sources like administrative data. Romina already mentioned that different teams in the organization are already using administrative data in a number of countries to study intergenerational mobility. We could apply the same approach to study intergenerational mobility and opportunity, even if data requirement might be even higher in that case. But I think that there will be a clear advantage to be able to go local and clearly produce local level estimates of opportunity and mobility that would strengthen the link with a place-based policy that we show in the report are so important. The other point is about the complexity of the topic and of the research. So the need to choose rightly the circumstances we look at, which are also needs also to be policy amenable, of course, and to keep into account the different trade-offs by among policy options. But I think it's also about, as Professor Pereira said, possibly going beyond income and earnings. So we are doing work on wealth inequality, and in particular, for instance, inherited wealth as a proxy of inequality of opportunity. And this is also linked to the topic that you mentioned of housing, because we are expressly looking at how inherited wealth and intergenerational transfer can facilitate access to homeownership for young recipients. So this is a promising avenue of research. And then again, the need to better understand the link between social mobility, opportunity, and inequality of outcomes to give a three-dimensional picture of inequality. I think this is something we can definitely work on. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And perhaps if I can also add a couple of words on what we see as being, as going to be the priorities. I think the work or the analysis of social infrastructures and also accumulation of wealth, which we just started, is Italian area where we want to do a little bit more work.
It is complex, it is sensitive, so we know all of that, but I think we definitely want to make sure we can support policymakers with those perhaps new policy types of policy interventions. So a lot for us to do, but thanks so much to all participants, to the speakers for a very rich, very insightful discussion. Thanks so much for the audience in the room, but also online for your attention. Thanks so much to the interpreters that are sitting in front of us for the excellent support throughout the event. We do hope that this new report, to have not, will continue the rich legacy of the work that we started a few years back, growing inequally and then a broken social elevator, to inform public and policy debates on this very crucial topic. Of course, all participants, you're very, very welcome, encouraged to visit the report's webpage. There are many, many more resources available. We wanted to actually open the floor to some Q&A. We didn't have the time. Please get in touch for any questions you may want to ask to us. We'll be delighted to answer. The final words go to the big team that work on developing this report. I wanted actually to call all of them, but I saw the list of others was very long, so I'm not going to. But all of them are acknowledged. Thank you so much, all of you who have contributed to this very important report. And I think with that, I'm going to close the event. Thank you so much.